This is an interview with Mr. Harrington again.
Well, Parker Williams was one of the least informed of our bunch, but he was the one with the most practical conception of what should be done. And he had an opportunity several times to reimburse himself, and he took it against everybody's advice. The result was that he died compositably well off. Now,
What sense is that when you broke yourself? You make some money?
make some money. They only got $400 a year for session at Blackman Day, and nobody would hire him. So he had to live off the $400 a year. And in hunting through the various government archive, he discovered that there was one or two patches of land that had not been surveyed and consequently open for, not for homesteading, just to do more of a homestead, but they're open for what they called at that particular time the settlement land for I just forget what reason they had for occupying this land, but he did occupy it. He occupied one piece of land just up from Ladysmith. Well, this land finally cut into the stream of commerce, and there was some very fine timber on it. And he was able to reimburse himself by this increase in the because of the price of this land. Now, aside from that, he was about the only one that I know of that didn't made anything out of it. Jim Harfenwaite did make a little out of it, but Jim Harfenwaite was a graduate of Dublin University and was a very, very astute man with a terrific memory, and he didn't care whether he told the truth or not. He just simply floored his opponents. He was a terrific scientific feature with the energy to spare. He was into everything. To give you an idea of what sort of the man he was, he almost defeated Dan Black for the champion. Dan afterward became the champion wrestler of the world, beating Tom Jenkins. You know, I love the kind of a man Hartnett was. He was into everything, tremendous shoulder. Well, he took up settlers' rights. He took up the settlers' rights business, and he made quite a bit of money selling the settlers' rights. And the settlers got the right from the coal company. The coal company had to pay. Jimmy Dunsmore had to pay. Parker Williams didn't do anything like that, but he managed to make a little anyway. He in 1916, we were just on the verge of a depression. The war was on at the time, and we were on the verge of a depression. And we were also a little bit behind as a socialist party. The withdrawal of a number of the workers from the industrial field had left a gap, and wages commenced to rise just about that time. Now, the position of the Socialist Party was that it didn't matter how the wages went up, we would be in the soup anyway. What we required was a complete revolution. Now, as a consequence of this, with the IWW industrial workers of the world, they got a toehold and they took on socialist ideas, but at the same time they rejected them. As I said the last time you were here, we had some sort of a slogan that ran, strike at the ballot box. But the IWW, they turned that into strike at the election box with an axe. Okay? Well, that was the attitude at that particular time. And Parker Williams came along and he joined the Liberal Party. At least he didn't join the Liberal Party, but he hedged over with them. And for his support, they guaranteed him the Workmen's Compensation Board. That is, to pass the Workmen's Compensation Board Act. Previous to the passing of that act, there was a compensation, but you had to obtain the benefits through a lawsuit. And a lawsuit consisted of you making application for this through the law, hire a lawyer, make application, and the amount wanted would be given to you, and the lawyer would take his share of it. Well, Parker Williams, he forced through that, actually forced through the Compensation Act. Okay. Well, there's quite a few around the Compensation Act, which consists of an independent and one appointed by the manufacturers and one appointed by the workers, the unions. And Wynne, who was McDonald, who was a young lawyer out from the East, who was in McDonald's staff in Belfast. And then there was quite a few on the part of the workers. They wanted their various nominees from various places, and there was quite a few after because it was really a cushy job. They had 10 years tenure, guaranteed them, and something like $4,000 a year, which was considerable sum of money in those days. But Patella, I think it was Premier Patella, or old John Oliver, one or two of them, appointed Parker Williams for the workers. And there was a CPR master mechanic, what was his name? I forget his name. He was appointed also by the manufacturers. They suggested to Patella or John Oliver, whichever it was. I guess it must have been John Oliver because, he died shortly afterwards anyway. Well, then, of course, Parker Williams could no longer associate himself with the socialist ideas he had formerly had, and he was elected as a liberal later, or rather, the Liberal Party assisted in these elections, but in the meantime, when he quit to join the board, he supported Sam Guthrie. And Sam Guthrie was elected to the House in place of Parker Williams, you see. However, that part of the country in Nanaimo and Ladysmith and a good deal of Victoria was pretty well saturated with socialist ideas. And in those days, it was just a mud road from here to Victoria, and along that mud road, in fact, a lot of the timber was packed once in Ohio, particularly heavy timber that couldn't go through the machinery they had. So they took it down these roads, and in several places it fell off the rig and was rolled over onto the side. And it was a convenient board for all kinds of people. Going along there, and they paint on these big logs, they paint certain slogans, the Salvation Army, for instance, and trying to help people. I remember one particular sign that said, that was the Salvation Army. It said, "The wages of sin is death." And underneath, some radical sources had written, "Then vote for socialism and the abolition of wages." Something like that. Well, that was all. At any rate, that was the condition then. You could hardly go anywhere but somebody would shove a socialist pamphlet in your hand of some kind or another. Well, Parker Williams, he retired from the regular socialist propaganda movement. But with the rise in the labor movement, the federations down here, they had a little bit of a paper going, or a very small thing, and a little bit of an editorial. And the individual that was the editor, he, at that time, had been promised by some liberal group that he would be one of these commissioners on the Workers' Compensation Board. But they were outruled, the group that wanted him were outruled, and so instead of him getting this particular job, he got another job with the government. I won't mention any names, but he got another job with the government anyway. And that left the editorialship of this particular paper vacant. Now, it's not generally known, but for 2 or 3 years, Parker Williams wrote the editorials for that paper. No? So he didn't go very far away from the socialist.
No, no, it is. And there's a thesis at the university which said that Parker Williams got expelled on the 2nd of March 1916. What?
Well, I may have a near on that account. He may have, I don't know, but
You don't remember it?
no, he was, of course, that was Ladysmith. The Ladysmith vocal. No, I wouldn't, and
He came over from Vancouver and read them up.
well, Andrew probably be old Kingley. But that's how it happened. But he didn't go. He wrote the editorials for this labor paper for a long time.
Maybe 4 or 5 years. Maybe elaborate on the relation between the Socialist Party and the labor movement.
No, during those years, we had a group of members in the party who wanted to change its attitude towards the labor movement. Now, the labor movement was considered subordinate to the political movement. In the IWW, and they had, I think I mentioned it before, they had 2 wings or 1 board, the political wing and the industrial wing. And quite a few were confused. They thought they could use both wings, but in the end, in both parties, there was the shoot in the main group. Let the chips vote for what they may. That was one slogan they had. And they were determined that anyone who didn't shoot to the line should be expelled. Now,
He may be expelled under those circumstances. But while he was expelled from the party,
he didn't quit. He didn't quit. He didn't quit the party really. Well, he quit the party right through.
it seems to me that after the war, the Popular Party or really got sort of splinters up, didn't it? Oh, that's that. Especially
There was our PW,
but and there's
the Direct Pay Union. The other LFW was going fairly strong. Then there was the One Bay Union.
and then he worked for did some he never then.
The Social Democratic Party. But they had existed before that, and they had disappeared practically. But after the war, they increased things in strength. The One Bay Union started that went with the Social Democratic Party, and later on, 1931 or 2, I think it was, they had the Social Reconstruction Party, and they had the Regina Group, Cooperative Commonwealth, and then they had the Farmers Bunch. Now the farmers were pretty hard hit, but wheat had taken a tremendous jump during the war, and after the war, wheat fell to nothing. So there was the Farmers Group, there was the Social Reconstruction Group, and the third group. These three joined at Regina and formed the Social Reconstruction Party. Now the funny thing about that, the Social Reconstruction Group were a professional group. Now, in the general march of mankind from medieval structure based on the land through the industrial system, liars were always at the tail end of everything, and any advance on the part of the professional element was made by the doctors and the engineers. When the Depression struck us in 1829, 1929, 1930, 31, the doctors and the engineers, they formed a party, sort of the Socialist Party, and they call it the Social Reconstruction Party, you see. Because they were the hardest hit, but the lawyers never did. The lawyers stayed completely apart because their union was strong enough to keep them busy. And anyway, there was a bunch of bones to be picked during the Depression, and the lawyers were not too unhappy. But the doctors and the engineers were, because there was nothing really doing, and there was no way to pay the doctors' bills. Look at that. The doctors and the engineers, they formed Social Reconstruction Party. And in order to understand the proposition, they invited several of the socialist parties to come over to them and tell them all about it. So they did. And the university up here, they used to invite a bunch up there too. And there's 4 or 5 of the professors up there that got to be very, very close to us. Well, Parker Williams may have fallen in the den of the squabble. Parker Williams may have fallen, and somebody may have gone over from here. Because if you If you step one way to the right or one way to the left, you are marked man
in the Socialist Party.
in the Socialist Party.
And they ended up losing one, and they didn't they? They gradually petered out.
They gradually petered out until they couldn't even hold a meeting. Now we had the Empress Theatre there. We had several theatres. We had the Empress Theatre. And in the Empress Theatre, Hastings Street on a Sunday night, there was just a mob about 10 o'clock at night when the Empress Theatre came out. And they actually gave some wonderful talk there. One fella, Fitzgerald, did you ever hear of him? Well, he was a remarkable speaker. I took one or two parsons to hear him. I met quite a few parsons when I was organizing, you know. I used to go and see the parsons and try and get them lined up and find out what was doing in that particular district. And I took one or two of the parsons to hear Fitzgerald. And any parson I took to hear Fitzgerald was very much stuck on. They thought, as an orator, he was probably could be rated as an orator, and one of the great orators too. He used to put up some fine talk. The one what they call scientific. As a matter of fact, Fitzgerald didn't go down with some of the socialists. But he tended to keep away from science. Well, they considered science at that particular time. Well, when this blight struck them, finally not enough came to the Empress to pay the rent. And then they shifted over to another theatre, not enough came to pay the rent for that theatre. And finally we couldn't get enough to pay the rent in any theatre. So we simply did. And the client, wow, fella, George Whitehead, he was quite a character. He was no clownbaker. And he died and left a considerable amount of money. And that kept the Socialist Party going for some time. We published a bunch of books. And for a while, we just on those books till there was enough buying the books, and we were left with a whole stack of them on our hand. But we had a contract for paper to publish these books. And we were able to sell that contract to a newspaper in town. So we didn't exactly lose anything, you see. Hello, George Whitehead, the old fellow that left us this money. He had been a sailor, and then he had been up in the Klondike, and he made a bit of money. But he was quite a sister, what he knew about it. And he had one theory about gold. One time it was quite a squabble about the gold, its value, and all the rest of it. And that drifted down into our economic classes. And Geordie Morgan, you had the Geordie Morgan. Geordie Morgan was explaining the nature of gold to one of the economic classes. And this old fellow jumped off. He says, now to it, it's our billion scene. They just come in and they told the folk on the table, on the counter, and they weigh the gold, and that's all there is to it. Not else, just that. Well, that's the kind of an old fellow he was. But anyway, it's as good a theory of gold as he generally had, anyway. But maybe at that particular time, and since you raised the proposition, you raised out in my mind, and it may be that somebody did go from Vancouver and read Parker Williams out of the party, but he had left the party then.
What about these guys? They were, for instance, the guy called Sister Moore. One of the earlier ones was who'd been the Congress to TLC get elected from the Nanaimo.
Oh. Carl Smith?
Yeah. He went in with the left liberal in the air. What
Carl Smith was elected from the Nanaimo as a Labour man. And when he got by mayor, Verville, Alphonse Verville, was elected as a Labour man from somewhere in Quebec, Montreal, I think. But they both joined the Liberal Party. And also, when he died, his wife, Mary Ellen Smith, ran here and was elected here and was the only cabinet minister, female cabinet minister in Canada for a long time. She's forgotten. The people that run the labor movement here one time, they've forgotten that such a lady, Mrs. Mary Ellen Smith, was over in Parliament. He doesn't, well, she had no business to do, but they maintain that in writing their history, they maintain to write the whole history and just push her on one side. A couple with Mary Ellen Smith, he had enough sense to hire a publicity agent, and this publicity agent pushed her into every small corner they could find. If they could get any news concerning Mary Ellen Smith, they got it published. Even if they had to pay a reporter to mention a name in certain concerns, as that was, Mary Ellen Smith became quite famous, and when she died, she was really famous. The trouble is that when she died, she hadn't paid her publicity agent, and they sued the estate for what she owed them, and that's how I know that most of her publicity came from, like Bennett publicity. He had a business agent, and various to these other people, they have business agents, and they pay them to push their name into every bit of news that comes along. Well, that was Ralph Smith and Jim Harperwaite. When Ralph Smith went to Ottawa, Jim Harperwaite, he gave him quite a send off. Now, Jim Harperwaite have had him out wrong with Smith, didn't he? Yeah, the Smith man guy again. With the Liberal. Smith down in Bill Piket ran against Smith. No, but later on ran against Smith and was defeated. But when Smith went to Ottawa, Harperwaite gave him the same job. And Harperwaite, I remember, he thought he's quite an author. He's a friend about that. Jim Harper is really a big man, big brain, and a very forceful speaker. In the talk party? She was member. In the party was the member. But yeah. But he was a labor, his ILP, isn't he? No, he was Socialist Party. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But his ILP first, he was elected as a labor man. And he was elected in Ralph Smith's place. And when Ralph Smith went to Ottawa, Harperwaite delivered the speech, and he told them that now a stalwart individual who sprang from the lines of labor will now represent you, and instead of you sending petitions, you send the petition in books. This is our swim. He was a petition in books, and he sprang from the line of the river, and it was quite a speech. I forget it all now. I used to have it put on pile. I don't know what it is now, whether we could ever find it or not, but at any rate, it is a speech that should be dug up. I don't know how to dig it up, but it may have been in the Army Clavium. Yeah, probably could find it. And that was Ralph Smith. Ralph Smith, he went to Ottawa and he finally defeated in Ottawa for the seat. No, he died. No, he died. He was defeated for the seat. Yeah, that's right. But at any rate, he was elected again, and here. He was elected here, and he became a minister here, and he died here. And his wife won the seat, Mary Ellen Smith. That was the episode of Ralph Smith, as I remember it.
Did you when did you come to Vancouver?
When did I come?
Yeah.
Well, the first time I came was in 1908. I was organizing for the party then. And then I came back in 1911.
Now, were you here when the Ginger Goodwin strike was off?
Yeah.
Did you tell us anything about that?
Yes. By the way, I've got a picture of Ginger Goodwin.
Oh, I like them.
I got better in the picture of Ginger Goodwin than that with some other, but I've got the lead slim.
You get the plate.
I've got the plate.
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
I've got the plate, and I know about that because we were having a racket with the center at the time. Toothy was met the chief center. I forget his name. Toothy was met the chief center, and he led the Red Eye Stars. And we changed the name of the Clarion 3 times. The Indicator. He says, this has got to stop. He came out here from Ottawa. He says, this has got to stop. We don't have any more of this. He says, now I'm just putting it on the line. We don't have no more of this. So the next edition, we promised we changed the indicator. And the next edition, we brought out the red flag. But the second edition of the red flag, in the meantime, Ginger Goodwin had been shot by one of the bunch. Met him in the woods and shot him in the back. And the chief censor ordered us not to mention it. So we didn't mention it. What we did was print his picture and get his picture, which one of the boys had, have a plate made of it, and stick it on the front page and nothing else. 15 discipline. On the front page of the right there. Well, Ginger Goodwin, he came from Michelle. And he went to Trail from Michelle. When he was in Trail, he was kind of a speaker. That the Trail gang had joined the Western Federation of Miners. They belonged to what unionism existed in Trail was Western Federation of Miners. But Ginger Goodwin was finally appointed secretary of the Western Federation of Miners there, and he was elected. When war broke out, he got his papers to report. So he reported for examination, and then in the examination they found that he was okay. He complained that he had stomach trouble. And instead of appearing at the appointed time, he disappeared, and he disappeared into the woods. And that's where he was shot. And the proposition then was that he was shot for being a socialist and member of the of the Western Federation. I remember forming the news around, but each time I formed the news, I could hardly hear any reply because there were probably 2, maybe 3 mounted policemen listening in on the same Well, the result was that I didn't get much information at the time, but we had quite a burial, a dingy good one. He was buried up from the Nemo. I think he was buried in Cumberland. They had a big funeral there. And Bert Richard and one or two others, they made quite fiery speeches. And the thing was, for a minute or two, it looked as though it was going to boil down into the bloodletting business. But it passed over without any further trouble. But for a little while, it was pretty keen.
And what about the bunch of guys came and raided the labor temple, didn't they?
Ah, yeah, we had an artist. He was an artist. He was quite an artist. He was a letter tender. We used to paint all our signs for nothing. And he had a column of truth. Painted the business. And on this column of truth, he had a bunch of names. Mark, Angel, Ditkin, Larioli. He had all the various names. Way down, he picked up Tolstoy and all that with it. Dostoevsky, and he counted every name he could get on there. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the police raided us one time, and the petty police. They were looking around, digging into other things. We had safe, a small safe, and we'd lost the key. Anyway, we couldn't open it. But they sent for safe openers, and they finally opened it, and there was nothing on it. They came down there with the boats and automobiles, and they pulled the safe out of the headquarters and took it away and examined. There's a about a bash doors. But with the column of truth they had, they took down all these names very carefully. And one fellow says, gosh, look at a bunch of foreigners. Now, I don't suppose one of them realized that they were all eminent authors. They thought they were a bunch of foreigners.
It was in the process that's going.
This is in the sessions they had. It was funny.
They didn't take the whole thing with them.
They took this, they brought it back, but and they would have to dig up half of Europe to find the bones of the original. But they brought it back to us. They brought it all back to us and dumped it all down. We had to sort it all out. Yeah, that quarter. Oh yes, they had one. So I had one. They discovered one thing. There's the quotations from the Rubia, and they use it in the Winnipeg strike trial. He'd not the rumble of a distant gun. And somehow or another they connected this Orlando's. He connected it with the Winnipeg strike. Yeah. Yeah, they got that. That was somewhere there, and they got that, or somebody quoted it.
Did they raid your house?
No, they must me for some reason or other. They got another Harrington. But they missed me.
This is in 1919.
Yeah.
And what about in 1918, when you had this 24-hour strike here in Baskinland, they had a bit of a riot at the Paleda Temple. You were you there at the time?
Oh.
Yeah.
No, but I was responsible for part of it. I spoke at the meeting for the 24-hour strike. I spoke at the meeting, and I spoke at the meeting in Westminster, but the Westminster gang, they went back to work. It had gone strike, but they issued some kind of a proclamation that there would be a strike. It's this kind of stuff continued, and it wouldn't be a strike floating a red flag, but the strike a real made fight. They divorced themselves from a red flag fight. Yeah, 1918. That was the Gindigoodun, the aftermath of the Gindigoodun strike. Now, Gindigoodun had met a bunch of these people, and they were very well and very much impressed with him. He was a lot younger than us, and he was about 24, so. And there were quite a bunch of them that they were quite offended in a way that he should have been shot the way he was shot. And they expected in quite a few material forms, the witnesses wouldn't throw the individual who shot Ginger Goodwin. And he got no remarkably favorable news. No prayer, no Bill mentioned. Those who wanted to pat him on the back, they were really afraid to pat him on the back. The situation was a bloodletting situation and could easily have developed into something more serious. There was a paper being published, a magazine being published at the time in New York, The Class Struggle. Did you ever see it? And a little in that about it.
What about this meeting you were? Can you give any kind of description of that?
Well, there was really an Oddfellows Hall, I think. And half a dozen people spoke there.
Oh, maybe?
I wouldn't care to mention any names. I remember them. One or two of the names coming back to me now. But there was no dissenting voice. They were all in favor of a 24-hour strike. And the streetcar men, they decided they would go on strike, and they went on strike. And the returned soldiers who were organized then by taking out the piece of wire that kept their habit bound them, taking that out and letting a hat drop over the back of the neck, which was quite emblematic of the returned soldier. And they decided that they would run the streetcars. And they went down to take over the streetcars and they manned them. An organized attempt to run the streetcars, and some official on the BC Electric pulled the switch, filled all that, filled everything. Streetcars and everything else. Nothing could run.
That a company official?
And a company official. I know who he was, but he was inclined our way, all right, but he could see that if the returned soldiers took those cars out, someone could manipulate them, all right, but someone could not, and consequently there would have been somebody killed, and if there been bloodshed in any way that night, it would have been a real lie. It was that touch and go. Then the longshoreman, the next day, kept turn up. And the returned soldiers, they decided that that's gone far enough. or whoever was behind the tall soldiers. So they decided to go down and make the longshoreman go to work. And the longshoreman, he refused to go. They tore down the plaster of the wall and they hung over hung ropes holding the beam and tied these ropes to the stools around the hall, and they stood back these as battering rams. And the first bunch of soldiers that not just ran these battering rams out and pushed them down the steps. And they did the same thing they tried to do in the back windows of the longshoreman's hall. Down on Cordova Street, I think it was then.
At any rate, it was quite a study there.
And it finally petered out. But for a little while, it looked as though there might be trouble there. But there wasn't any trouble. However, it was all spontaneous. There was no organization on the part of the workers. That is, only incidentally, like when the longshoreman tried to take out the beat electric car, the town soldier tried to take out the beat electric car, or when they invaded the longshoreman's hall, the resistance to this effort just sprang up owing to the incidental affair going through the whole business. There's no organized attempt. But they used that in the Winnipeg trials to convict Johns, Russell, and Bill Piket. They used that in that trial. Bobby Russell was convicted first. And then when they got the conviction on Bobby Russell, there was Woodward and Ivans, two Parsons. Woodward was convicted and released, and Ivans did a year, and Piket did a year. And Johnny Johns, I think his name is, he got a year, and Bobby Russell got 2 years. I just forget how they managed, but Bobby Russell had been in jail anyway, and then when the trials came up later on. So that was in 1918 when a bunch of returned soldiers marched on the legislative chambers of Manitoba. And it made quite a background for the court case, although they didn't interfere with the returned soldiers. That is, they didn't arrest them. There were quite a few of them who made some quite fiery speeches at that time. They sent the railroad man even. We never had any strikes on the part of the railroads before that. But the train man and the fireman, they quit. And there was evidence of quite a lot of trouble there. The engineers and conductors, they stayed on the job. They kept the trains running. But I can remember we had a meeting here in Vancouver. We had 2-3 meetings. Is that right? Bobby had a meeting there, and they had quite a representation from the various states, and there was quite a few firemen and quite a few brakemen. Spoke at that meeting. I'd been sent by the locals to the view. And it, for quite a little while, maybe 3 or 4 months. Just that point when a lot of trouble could have taken place and just didn't take place.
What were the social thinking about that? What the social party think about the
Well, they took a determined stand on it that something had to be done, and something had to be done immediately. But of course, they worked in the propaganda on the proposition. It wasn't that intention to start trouble, but at first there was sufficient of them with what they call the Moscow point of view that they were quite willing to go through with it. And they had 21 points issued by Moscow, and these were voted on, but they were voted on by the Socialist Party. And those who had voted for the 21 points, they joined the Communist Party, not the original the Communist Party. The general attitude at that particular time would be best expressed in an edition of the Communist, which was published in Toronto. And read on the center page, 2 articles that joined up in the center of the page. They would have run right down, but 2 articles were smashed out, and an editorial was put in blasting the Socialist Party of Canada. So that gives you an idea that we weren't accepted by the communists.
How did you take it with the revolution coming, or
Well, they did. They did. We realized Engels wrote an article the year before he died, and he called it a retrospect. And in this article, he said that now the workers were aware of the fact that not at the barricades, what is the ballot box, can victory be won, you see. Well, that was already kid. We couldn't win anything at the barricade, but as it passed away, we could organize a might.
This the preface to the past struggles in France? Was it in the preface to past struggles in France? Or do you remember the pamphlet?
Yeah. Sure, it was a preface to the Class Struggles in France, and before it appeared, no, after it appeared there, it appeared in the Socialist. In the Chicago Socialist. It was in the Chicago Socialist on the front page of the Chicago Socialist.
Well,
it wasn't published what the Class Struggles in France. It doesn't appear in the issues of the Class Struggles in France, but it appears here in the Chicago Socialist as a package which should have appeared in the Class Struggles of France.
Yeah, that's what about the street railwayman? What can you tell us about that? About them when he joined in?
Well, I don't know much about the place because I belong to the Westminster branch, and they were divorced quite a bit from the Vancouver branch, and the Vancouver branch got involved in the 21 point business, and they elected 1 or 2 outspoken communists, and have remained outspoken communists since then. But They were always in the forefront of the labor movement. In Westminster, when up until then, we were quite active in all the labor movements, and we used to, one or two of the boys used to get up and propose that this particular organization, which they belonged to, believed in a doctrine of socialism. And that was debated back and forward, and usually we managed to get a majority of 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 20. But in Westminster, we last, I think, they decided they didn't want it by a majority of about the same majority. But in Vancouver, they overwhelmingly voted for.
Now, were they politically active? I guess the unions that Pete Wellen were active politically.
Yeah, yes, Angus McGuinness came from them. And he was so popular and had so much to do that, where originally he had been a conductor, he had to transfer to the front end to get away from the people who he couldn't do his work as a conductor and answer all the questions that were thrown at him. So he went to the front end. And from the front end, he finally, when jobs got scarce and people were objecting to him holding down 2 jobs, he quit working altogether, although he maintained the payment of his dues right to date, because the last issue of the magazine they published, his name was there, and having died as a member of the and although he hadn't worked on the job, he hadn't worked, I don't suppose he had worked on the job for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But he had got to be used.
What they do politically? They donate money to political action.
They donated money, and they donated a considerable part of that time, and they donated quite a few of the votes.
The union.
They
Did they have Piket? After Piket?
No, and well, they elected Alderman Jack Plate. He belonged to the party. Or he did. I can mention his name. I can't mention him because right now, on my end of it, you see, it's not a question of what they could do to me, because they couldn't do anything to me. But they visit the sins of the fathers upon the children of the first, fourth generation of searchers is concerned. Here we have a case in Winnipeg, case in point, with a woman and a daughter who were not permitted to visit Canada because their son had been a member of the Communist Party in England. And one or two little things like that the police, they have a record of all that they're on, and they did have to go back over it, and they can mad me when
I spoke, if we could see their record, this might help us.
and you have it incredible. And yeah, as you could see all the record, and if the record read like, well, I know of them, and some of the antics they pulled at times. I know what they would do. They do this, you don't a little bit, possibly a little bit more active in digging up members of the labor movement, but they are also active in digging up members of their politically opponents. They have records of all these fellows that they got the record of 1 or 2 social predators here. and they had run into the law. This got down here in the Delta, and another fella up in the North Country somewhere. But had been nominated for social predators and had police records. And there's one or two more that have police records that I know about, and I'm sure they know about. But however it happens to be, it's not necessary to bother them. Not that they did anything wrong, but that they didn't do something that was right, which is that is more of a distinction than a difference.
Did you have much trouble with the RTP while we're on it? Did you ever run into them problems? Especially like when you were working for the Socialist Party in the Interior. But that's social well in 1907. Social predators? No. Did you run the RTP with a problem then at all? The FLP? No, when you were in the Socialist Party. Now you organized and you were in the mines and so on. Yeah. Were they a problem at all? The RTP at that time? Really? Were they a problem then? The RCMP. No, Belly in them.
No, they were mostly in the West. Quite a few of them were socialists. The peculiar thing about the Confederate at that time was,
RNWP.
Quite a few of them drifted over from the English Confederate when they started the Canadian Constabulary and the African Constabulary, where they started them. The Canadian Constabulary were the result of the Red River bunch of half-breeds who had some kind of an arrangement with the government that they should occupy the land. They should own the land they occupied. I don't know just exactly what took place, but it seems that the government wasn't altogether, that is, that's the big company, wasn't altogether just to them. The result was that they had the half-breed rebellion. Now, out of the half-breed rebellion, there finally grew the Royal Northwestern Police, see? And they had a distinctive uniform and all this, and they did most of the judges who took up afterwards, they took up where the country got organized, but they did most of the work. And another policeman, he would go out and he would settle the disputes in the country, the roads in the early days before we got really organized. And mostly they were concerned with firefighting and odd things like that. They weren't much concerned with the labor movement, although on one or two occasions, there was occasion to call them in. The labor movement, although on one or two occasions, there was occasion to call them in. There was a strike in the coal mines in the early days, 1903 and 4, in the Cosmos Pass. They called them on a police man. The Western Federation of Miners, they conducted the strikes. They had policy, and they used to carry that policy out in their state. And it got them into trouble in various places. Sometimes they were out of business. But in the Kuznets Pass, he had his take there, and they seized the train in the Kuznets Pass yards, and they loaded all the scabs they could find in the train, and they took the train to Michelle, matter about 21 miles. They went down to the railroad office and got the dispatch to clear the lane for them, and they took the train to Michelle. And by the time they walked back to Pony again, the train was there with all these scabs on it. They'd been brought back with a detachment of the police. I thought the post evidence high personally of any interference on the part of the Northwest Mounted. But as I was saying, they were recruited largely from the elder constabulary of the old country. Quite a few sergeants and people like that. They came out here and got jobs as the Northwest Mounted. And they were paid probably maybe, I think the sergeants got $35 or $40 a month, but the mounted policemen got $30 a month. Now, when they're in London, or Glasgow, Edinburgh, Blackpool, Liverpool, or any of the big places, part of the duty was to go to a socialist meeting, because there had been trouble there. There was trouble there during the Chartist revolt, and at that time, the police generally one part of the duty was to attend the socialist meeting and see if anything what was going on, and report to headquarters there. So that probably a dozen out of maybe say about 10% of these people that went to these socialist meetings got to be socialists, and probably 10% of those who got to be socialists got to be transferred over here, because I met at least quite a few Northwest Mounted Policemen workers. Of course, got nothing to go by, because at that particular time, the working class were in a pull. There was the Clark Fair decision and one or two other decisions that was gone against them. And the Labour Party started up from Peter Hardy and went right through until they were sufficiently powerful to threaten the government. So that the fact that a few of these had been in the constabulary and had drifted over and joined the South African, the Australian, and New Zealand, or the Canadian constabulary wasn't at all remarkable, because generally that was the attitude of the working class at that time. It was generally an attitude of change. A change has taken place, by the way. When I went to sea first, we used to get £4.10 a month. I see the seamen here, they get $330 a month, and they're asking for $40 a month of a raise, which was worth double what he got to start with. They're getting $40 a month of a raise. At least that's what they're asking. Well, that shows the attitude, the general attitude between the working class then and the working class now. They're much better off, extremely much better off than they were in the beginning of the century. It was a scramble all the time. Whatever you saw was a game. For instance, the streetcar man got a raise of 1 cent an hour. I can imagine that when they kept it a raise of 1 cent an hour, which any worker would throw now, 19 cents an hour, 20 cents an hour, 40 cents an hour, they've scorned that, won't have it at all. But we were glad at that time to accept a raise of 1 cent an hour. So you can see the enormous cleavage between those days And these days, I think.
You said something about the ColdNet, the ProsNet pass strike last time, but checking back, last time it said one of the big disputes in they did create a labor movement in the province, didn't it? There was a big strike up there. Now this may be just a late one, or
Well, there was 1904, I think, that was a big strike. But 1906 I think, probably what you refer to. There was a big strike then over two things. The moving of the McGinty and the systematic timbering. Now, the coal companies wanted the miner to work his place until he was told to timber it by the fireman. But the miners refused. They demanded systematic timbering, timber every 18 inches. And that was one of the clauses. They must timber every 18 inches. And the payment for the McGinty moving in inflamed coal, the McGinty was a wheel that pulled the loaded car pulled the empty up. So the miners wanted to have that under their direct control, not under the control of the fire boss. The fire boss could interfere either in height or in depth or in gas. And he could check on the condition of the timbering and various things like that. But he couldn't order a timber put in a certain place outside of the systematic timbering. If he saw a place that was dangerous, and he could order a certain kind of timber to be put in there to protect that place. But the miner didn't have to do it. The miner demanded the right to run his own place. He was a miner, a qualified miner, had a miner certificate, and was competent to run his place. Outside of that, the firebox was the boss. He knew gatas and various other things which the miner knew also, but wasn't supposed to know. That is, he didn't have to know to qualify the miner. Well, that will probably be the strike you refer to. The first strike was over recognition of the union. The company refused to recognize the Western Federation of Miners, and the United Mine Workers took over. There was a strike on that occasion, but didn't last long. Well, that was the strike where they took the scabs out of town with a railroad train, and when the police were in town when they got back. They before they took them out of town, they lined them all up and they made them all kneel down. That was the Western Federation of Miners. Made them all kneel down and repeat an oath after the organizer of the strike. That we hereby inform all comers that we shall in no particular divulge the names of those who now appear before us, and a whole bunch of other. That's quite spectacular. And the miners in those days, they had no family there. They were mostly footloose. They could go back to the old country to their family, or they didn't have a family. They were mostly footloose, and they were accustomed to being chased all over the place. It was nothing to them just to pack their old telescope suitcase, what few goods they had, pack them in the old telescope suitcase, or roll them in a blanket and off to the next town. That was Mangaland. Different now. They have to take a house with them and a family with them and an automobile with them and all that goes with that. Television and radio and a whole bunch of stuff. Then they have accumulated considerable property now. But in those days, they didn't have any property, and they were a dangerous bunch of men to deal with. I remember one instance of when they had a big explosion there. They were talking about in the various places, and one man happened to be calling there and had the news, and he happened to say, he said, "The big explosion, the man." Yeah. Anybody tell? About 230. And he happened to say, so the story goes, I don't know whether there's any truth in it, I didn't hear. But I can't imagine a man being that not to say is at all. Now, he could have said that in true respect. He could have said that indifferent to the number of killed, or he could have said that owing to the fact that that number of people killed in the explosion impressed on his emotions the reaction to which words failed to give proper expression. But they took him to Harlem and had a bridge across the West Fernie, and they took him, tied a rope around him, and threw him over the bridge, and he pulled him to the water, back and forward. That was supposed to do in a boat,
That the miners that kill harm.
The miners killed Harlem. No, I wouldn't. I didn't see it done, but the story is that it was done. And then in the magistrate's office, they got a group of, at the time of the strike, they got a group, and the magistrate, some judge, burned them over for so much to keep the peace or something. And they raided the magistrate's house that night and opened the safe and took all the documents out, burned them in the stove, and the fellows that were supposed to keep the peace, they got out of town and they couldn't find them. So that blew over. Well, that's the kind of men they were then. Kind of lawless. And they were lawless because they had nothing to fear from the law. They didn't care. They could beat out the state, so they could beat it somewhere else. And it would take too much trouble to catch them and to convict them of any offense was also a difficult matter, so they pretty well let them go. And in those days, they had nothing else to do but talk over their grievances, and they had very little else to do to have their grievances attended to them. Mostly, the strikes didn't seem to have any great bearing on their condition of life, and they were quite content with what they got. And what they got was just enough to get along on. But still, it was enough to save a little on and buy one or two goods around them and invest in a corner lot or something like that. There's always an escape valve somewhere along the line. It wasn't exactly, they weren't exactly condemned to stay in that bit of life to which God had called them. There was an escape, and a lot of them do escape.
Were you in on the strike? In the protest then?
Not the first strike. I was in on the second strike, but at that the time I was in on it, I had a homestead. And instead of staying with the site, I went out to do my homesteading duties. So I missed quite a bit of the fun. After a while I was doing my homesteading, I hadn't done one or two other homesteaders who were doing the same thing. And they all regretted that they hadn't been there to help in the site. But the regret was there. However, the homesteading duty came first, and they went homesteading. I didn't prove up on my homestead, but I had a homestead. There was a country to fill up, and that's one of the ways I had of filling it. They had a saying that the government bet you $10. The government bet you 150 acres against $10 that you couldn't stay there for 3 years. That was the guide that went around at that time. But they're all right for socialism. I ran in the McLeod writing 1906, I think. And in the southern end, where the mines were, I could have been elected. And in the northern end, where the mines were, I could have been elected there. And I got a considerable healthy vote throughout the rest of the country, but not enough to overcome the farmers who had come in from elsewhere and the tradespeople who had come in expecting to make a bunch of money. Or I had a fairly respectable vote, about 6 or 700 out of 3 or 4,000. No day. And I met a group of people there, very, very revealing. I met at least half a dozen old Civil War veterans. I had fallen in 60 to 65. And they were all concerned about the difference. I remember one old fellow saying, in those days, we fought to free the slaves that were actually slaves. But in these days, you are fighting to free slaves who are, in our opinion, not slaves. They're not purchased slaves. But we used to always refer to them as fellow slaves, company chairman and fellow slaves, or something like that. These old fellows who fought in the Civil War, they remarked that, and when they came here to stock, that it was peculiar that we should repair one like that. It was also peculiar that the first man that called these modern workers a slave was Bobby Burns. And he said, if I design yon lordling slave by nature's laws designed, why was an independent wish implanted in my mind? And that's the first time you see these people, that in that particular sense, the first time you see these people refer to a slave. To continue like suggest that's a good suggestion too. I often thought of following it out. Robert Owen, who started the utopian, what they call the utopian, and he married the girl from that particular region called Dale, Georginia Dale, I think. His son, Robert Dale Owen, of course, you probably remember him. He wrote a book on his father. Well, this girl that Robert Owen married was the chum, or I have heard the Mavis singing it first on in the morning. I've seen the Judah singing to the just newly born, but Maria Legale and another of Burns' poems. This girl that Robert Owen married was their chum. Okay? Now, Robert Burns twice is placed in history at the home of this Dale, the father of this girl. So it's quite possible that Robert Owen, who came to Glasgow, by the way, there's one true story about Robert Owen that's rather funny. Even in history, you'll find that he came to the hills of Scotland, way up in the hills of Scotland, and they're very, very primitive country, and that primitive country is shown by the fact that when Robert Owen showed them a gold piece, they were afraid of it. They wouldn't handle it, and they considered, well, I know that's not true, because Burns himself says the rank is but a guinea stamp. The man's a gold for all that. And in two other places he mentioned Ford and Robert Louis Stevenson, he had his characters of that age also mentioned burying gold and digging gold up and transferring gold, so that's not having the ability. But they also don't recognize that when Robert Owen went to Newlander, he was not by any means a philanthropist, a philanthropic manufacturer. He afterwards became a ham. This Dory was quite a radical himself, insofar as he was opposed to the church as it stood, and insofar as Burns himself had a racket with the church, it's not at all impossible that Robert Owen didn't get his socialism or his mere socialism from Robert Burns. It could be traced if somebody had the angle, had the time to hunt it up.
Related to Robert Brink, or angle trying to process anything.
The Trois Dogs, so in the Trois Dogs, you have these two dogs talking to one another, and they talk in good sensible language. And then he has all the other, right too. He has several letters that he wrote to various people. In fact, one of them he got fired over, as he was engaged.
To get back to BC labor history.
Yeah.
Uh,